I think the underlying intention of having everyone free and having everyone control what they own and allowing for access for technically anyone with a wallet address to be able to hold their own funds and control those is first and foremost, no questions, like a really beautiful value proposition. This too shall pass for good events, bad events, and being more and more aware of it, like through exposure therapy, definitely helps. I don't like the word cope because it kind of has a victim connotation, but it allows you to thrive more in the human experience, I'd say. When things are murky, it's often in points where there's a lot of cycles changing and you're kind of like throwing your hands up and like, oh, I've never seen this combination before. How would I weigh that out?
Hello, welcome to Web3 Revolution. Web3 Revolution is a series of episodes exploring the next generation internet. We will bring in builders, doers, and active participants of this exciting revolution to our show. This is a podcast for education and information purposes. We will provide accurate information to the best of our knowledge, but the podcast content should not be taken as investment advice. I'm your host, Hannah, and today I'm with my co-host, Nick. We have really amazing guest, Maren. Is that how you pronounce your name?
Maren.
So Maren is an astrologer and a crypto trader studying the correlation between the planetary cycles and the price action in the crypto market. And she's also a vegan and a former NYU student and also a Stoic philosopher. Welcome to the show, Maren.
Stoic philosopher. That's wow. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Yes.
Welcome to Web3 Revolution podcast. I'd love to get some background on you. Like, what interests you about cryptocurrency? What got you initially hyped into the market and doing trading and all this other stuff that you've been working on for the past few years?
I entered crypto simply by researching personal finance when I needed to start saving my own money. In early 2020, I was graduating from university. My undergrad career was ending, and I knew that I needed to plan for the future. Opened a bank account. This was in the midst of the March 2020 crash, and started researching more efficient options just because I was having trouble with understanding what a brokerage account was, everything that needed. And through that time, found crypto, given I have a philosophy background, the ethics of it and letting people own their own money themselves, have access to it was important to me. And then I started gradually getting into trading and saw that as a viable way to maintain increasing the amount of money that I made.
And I'm very interested to know more about how you have kind of had this trajectory of coming from the place that you grew up, moving to New York City and getting into cryptocurrency and becoming something between somebody that knows a lot about how influence can move the market and how it kind of can't, and how there's kind of a weird fugazi going on there in some cases, and in some cases it's more tangible. I've heard you talk about how there's lots of different correlations and trends that you see when you're doing these trading activities. You associate it to tarot readings, and I know there are other people that associate it to other things that they have interest in, like I do biochem. I relate it to biology because that's just what I know. That's complicated and super interesting to look at. I'm curious to know more about how you initially started to do this trading work and when you decided to make it into a business and do the tarot stuff and start doing AI development.
Yeah, I do want to clarify. I actually have no background in tarot, only astrology. So I definitely don't know. I mean, I'm familiar with tarot. I have some
I'm sorry,
familiarity, but no, you're good. I just, totally different. Like tarot's cards and more intuitive, and astrology is tracking planets and cycles. So I look to others with skills for tarot, but I myself am really only astrology. So grew up learning and tracking astrology. Started out in very like pop sun sign as a kid. As I was a teenager, got more into world events, have a background in acting, and that's what I went to NYU for, and then switched to philosophy, which I found a better support for my astrology practice. Then as I was graduating, started to learn about personal finance, found that very, very interesting. Like I hadn't been interested before. That led me to crypto, and I started tracking the world cycles of finance. I started to see the opportunity to put my money where my mouth was and trade. And at the same time as TikTok blew up, I then had more clients. So I had disposable income in order to trade and invest with. And that led me to where I am today.
I see. Wow, amazing. I didn't know your acting background, but philosophy is certainly really, really interesting. So you're always extremely eloquent, and you definitely manifest different personas, when you're talking with us and when you're on TikTok. I read one of your interviews and you said, I'm always interested in tracking patterns and cycles. So astrology,
and crypto trading, they're two major arenas that somehow manifest very, very interesting patterns, right? Can you tell me, like, how did you start to combine those two things together?
So in astrology, you can track pretty much any world cycle because you're looking at certain patterns of planets. And if you put that up against when things in the world happen, that creates a data set. Financial astrology is nothing new. It's been practiced for thousands and thousands of years. The cycle of seeing prices go up and down, planets have different alignments and correlating those. So by no means is what I'm doing novel. I just don't think that someone of kind of the combination of my age, my background, and being on social media in the way that I was beginning to blow up with had been done with crypto and astrology before. So immediately I just started looking at basic astrology concepts and how they applied to what's called the Genesis block of Bitcoin and the planetary positions at that moment representing the birth chart of Bitcoin as it would a human life. So in the same way that I can look at the astrology relating to a human's life and predict good or bad trajectory for someone's life, I can look at the astrology relating to the Genesis block of Bitcoin and its planetary positions at that moment to determine number go up or go down, given that it's the same if this then that statements that talk about bullish astrology or someone favorable in their own life versus bearish astrology for Bitcoin and someone having troubles in their own life. Same inputs, just a different output with articulating it. So nothing I do is frankly that new or novel. It's just the industry that I'm in is an up and coming industry. So there was an ability to be one of the first people doing it in that sense.
That's amazing. So you basically take, any coin, like any cryptocurrency as a person, and you have the birth location, right? You have the birth time and a lot of other information. That's extremely interesting. Like as someone, who grew up in China and who's like really into some Chinese traditional methods of, character analysis and fortune telling, I'm certainly, really, really intrigued by this.
So actually, I kind of fibbed. I did a lot more than an hour of research. What I noticed when I was looking into the content that you produce, it does seem to me that you've done kind of a lot in a very short period of time. And it's kind of typical for the bull market, but it seems to go back further than that. It seems like you're kind of on this trajectory of constantly doing things. I don't know you, so I feel very presumptuous talking about you in the third person, like you're not right there. I'm trying to frame this in a way that it's conditional to what you would say, but it seems to me that you are a very driven person who is kind of using these network effects to try to disperse information that you think is important, that you are passionate about, and try to refocus people's attention onto something that you believe is important and that has a priority for you. And I've noticed that this is coming in the context of, the pandemic and everybody having this moment to kind of breathe and talk to each other and kind of tune in to what they're actually feeling and doing and putting in their bodies and all this other stuff. The first week of the shutdown, animals up here in upstate New York started coming out more. It was, the air was cleaner. It was really nice. Do you think that the pandemic played a role in how you went about doing this and how you kind of had the time and the space to be able to do that? Were you still going to college when you started?
So I remember the pandemic, like New York lockdown started when I was actually on a trip very early March to Sedona. And that's where actually someone recommended that I just download TikTok. They weren't really like telling me to get on it necessarily, but they said, maybe you'll want to post, but you should just download it. I'm kind of a minimalist with where I spread my information and my data. And so I don't like downloading new apps unnecessarily, even if it's not a safety risk. Like I just don't really like to enter things without fully understanding them. So I ended up downloading it and my trip was cut short because I knew that New York was going to go on lockdown and I didn't want to be like the last person at Trader Joe's trying to get groceries. Looking back on my camera roll, I definitely was. And literally everything was empty at my like East Village Trader Joe's. And I was finishing up my undergrad degree. So I had like 6 weeks left. So I was technically going to school, but because it was Zoom school, I didn't have the hours of walking all over NYU campus from like building to building all day, which meant that for one, I'm very time efficient. So I don't need to be present all during class. Like, frankly, like I get in, I get out, and I would be doing other things. I would do all my work basically within the class. I work very, very quickly. So if I can do multiple things, like be listening and also typing out the answers to the assignment or the paper about that at the same time, I'm going to be doing it. So that led me to start wanting to post a little bit on TikTok. I don't think it would have happened outside of the pandemic. I am still a very like in real life person. Like even during the pandemic, like I would meet up with friends just like during that time and just like be with them. I'm not someone who likes to be completely alone and isolated, but I do think that the growth of TikTok in general, and because I had so much time that I could fill, it was like nonstop. Some days in the beginning when I saw that I could really grow this, it was like 10, 15 TikToks a day. And don't think I would have had the space to do that that if the pandemic wouldn't have happened.
I see. I want to go back to astrology itself. And, you just mentioned about how you spend your time in the pandemic. We basically live in a very surreal and chaotic world, seeing many memes on Instagram saying, I'm tired of witnessing history happening in front of me. I think astrology provides really meaningful explanation of some ambiguous or even confusing situation, we all been through. And it definitely can increase our sense of control over something we cannot control, right? So how would you really explain the phenomena of your popularity during the pandemic or, the bear market?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people's reason for getting into astrology is then redirected when they better understand what it is, because it's not a causal phenomenon. It's not explaining like why things happen. A lot of the criticism against me that comes from immediate pushback is a complete mischaracterization of what exactly we're doing, because we're not saying, this is happening because of the planets. It's more like, look, these cycles have corresponded with world events, and it's interesting to see when these things will happen again or when they have in the past to better understand how things will develop or how they have developed leading up to this. And I think that with the pandemic being a sudden hardship in the face of a lot of the world that has never had that big of an inconvenience or like redirection with how they live their lives, that then took them to ask bigger questions. It turned a lot of people into armchair epidemiologists and vaccination experts, and also just in general looking for more understanding of how we got here and what is to come. So I think it drew a lot of people to ask bigger, more philosophical questions and have more time to inquire about those questions. And then astrology being something that does attract some of the people who would already come into it with skepticism, I'd say, and like, wait, this what led us here? Like, it definitely seems like it was a great recipe of multiple factors with the growth of TikTok growth being more prompted by the lockdowns and people with more time on their hands, and then people on TikTok getting more organic reach that are weird or striking. And a lot of the astrology community is that was a really good storm for people's questions to not necessarily get answers, but get satisfaction.
Have you thought about using astrology like on other things in your life other than, predicting finance? Have you done something like doing a birth chart for the pandemic, doing the birth chart for, Omicron, something?
Yeah, actually, when the pandemic started, I was new to finance. So I was pretty publicly like, oh, wow, like crypto. But I wasn't like familiar enough with what finance was to have the context to speak well about its financial application or with its astrology, because it's one thing to be able to track something. It's another thing to be able to speak on it with adequate context. Like with COVID at first, I was going back to the charts of when it was announced in Wuhan and then certain lockdowns and the charts of like the first vaccine delivery. So definitely my context before finance was world events in general and what interests me. And that led me into the world events that revolve around finance.
You've talked about not wanting to necessarily have TikTok be your end game. It's more like your entry point. And you want to build this company that you're building now. What would be an ideal outcome for you if you were in the space for a few years? Do you want to be in the space for a few years? Do you see this as a long-term or a short-term kind of thing that you want to do? Or is this something that you just want to build with flexibility, organically grow it and see how it goes?
I see this being a very long-term thing. For one, I grew up confused with why my own personal astrology focuses nearly all on very strange, erratic money. It's like a very difficult combinations just around like literal just volatility and like money is a big focus of my life. And so upon entering crypto, it immediately made sense. I see myself developing and growing in a way where what I'm doing currently is short-term with how I can understand the space, because the more that I understand it, the more that I see that I was naive and I didn't really understand how things worked. And then my ability to build in the space grows. But I don't see necessarily like my immediate choices being end game by any means. I think I'll continue to build and grow as I have a better understanding of what building and growing can mean. But I definitely see myself existing in the space very long term and building something that can last beyond me when I need to take periods in my life to do other things or simply, go through other directions. Like right now, a lot of my content's more geopolitical just because for the past few days, weeks, that's what I've been studying. So I understand there'll be times in my life where it'll always be crypto related, but I do have, other interests and things that I do. And I think that's important because the microcosm of tracking financial markets, in my opinion, it's just mentally leads to people down rabbit holes that are not conducive for their overall well-being. So I make sure to have other things I'm tracking at the same time so that my life is not just like red candles and charts, because I do see kind of what that turns into if it's unchecked.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally see, how as you said, you can get easily overwhelmed or, feeling really depressed by looking at that information. Can you maybe like give us a sense of, as a very popular YouTuber, as a very successful TikToker, your daily routine? Like, how do you handle or manage your day? And help me understand, how do you catch up with all those marketing trends and geopolitical news without getting overwhelmed by those information?
Yeah, I'm a big morning person. I always have been. So, like waking up, working out, doing the most difficult tasks like prepping a video or doing research before like 10, 11 is very, very important to me. Unless there's literally like I'm being paid to be in an event or I need to be like, it's a friend's birthday and I'm going out for them or something. I literally don't get any value out of messing up my routine. People think it's admirable. I'm like, no, like you enjoy, I don't know, drinking, going out. I enjoy being a sober, vegan, yogi person. Like I actually get more out of that. So my morning is very, very important to me. And I try to do all time pressing tasks before like noon at the latest. I'm never really filming in the morning ever because it's always just like scripting, writing. Then during like the day, I'll take calls. I like to do what I call mega batching, where each day I kind of have a trend to my tasks. Always morning is the most difficult time intensive things, but I like to dedicate a whole day to scripting or a whole day and afternoon, evening, night to filming. Whole day to have VC calls if I'm raising. So I like to hone in on one thing that I can just repeat over and over. And if I am researching and doing like an ongoing afternoon of research for content, I have like hour-long blocks. So I'll be like, you do this much in this time, and then you cap it, because I understand how, even though it can be in the same skill set, if you just give like 4 hours to just research, that's not directionable. So I have like specific things that I know I need to cover. I need 2 videos on this. I have a partnership with like this company, so I need to make sure I have like a crypto video end of the month. What can I research for that that's relevant and I'm interested in? So once I fill those, and while I'm doing research, it's very objective is what I'd say. I practice stoicism, or just that's a big interest of reading of mine. What I do like read and research is, how do I not ascribe good or bad to the world, have the minimal amount of emotional turbulent reactions to things, and simply see it as up or down, similar to a market. Like I can short the market and make money off of it. If I have an inconvenience, a delay, something that's majorly obstructive in my life, how can I actually utilize that for good? And it's not easy as it sounds, but I'm not someone who like reads the news and has visceral reactions to it. Like I think that could stem from, literally, I just grew up in a household of like people that like came out of like the Holocaust and war. So I think I have a threshold. Even like humor is very common about these things. So I think maybe I come in with less sensitivity and more ability to take all that information in. And also being a prominent figure online, I just like get so much hate and so many attacks that my stimulus threshold for negativity is very, very high. I think actually through having a very set morning routine, first and foremost, like this morning, for whatever reason, I woke up very, very panicked. I knew the rest of my day, there's no way the rest of my day is going to go uphill. I didn't mean to, but that morning foundation is like the most important. So if I can ensure that that's as good as it can be, then I can handle a lot more on top of it. And I basically always have like a 10 to 11 p.m. bedtime, like no questions asked. In fact, I think it's funny if people have the wrong impression of me and they look at me and they think like, oh, she's a party girl. I'm like, absolutely not. Like literally, no, I don't know. So unintentionally, I really enjoy being highly strict with like the way I live my life.
I see. I read something and there's one quote stuck in my mind, which is, to practice stoicism, you only take care of things you can control and you don't worry about things you cannot control. And I think that sentence just liberated my mind a lot.
Exactly. I think as someone myself who has very controlling tendencies, like I tend to prefer that I'm the one that can take on the responsibility. That leads to a lot of issues when I can't be that person. Namely, like I've had a lifelong struggle with planes and flight, because if it's turbulent and literally it's just my brain is like, oh, you can't control this. Oh, absolutely not. Like as a kid, I'd be like, I need to speak to the pilot right now. Like this, we gotta like know. And of course, it just was funny. Like there's videos of me as a very young kid where I'm like, excuse me, like we need, like, no, like, it's pretty funny. So I still to this day really don't like flying, like really, really do not like flying. But every time I see the test of like, can you give up the control? Because you have to. And then afterward, I'm like, I did it. Like you didn't do anything. But I see that as a very useful skill set for those of us who can have trouble not micromanaging life, which is unsustainable and stupid. So, yeah.
I'm really curious, how would you justify the relationship between, do your own research and astrology calling? What if I'm not an expert in astrology, but what if those two things, what if like the patterns you're reading in the market and in your research is contradicting to what the astrology is telling you? Like, what would you do?
I've never really had a situation where I found that the astrology was wrong. It was always me thinking that one cycle outweighed another, because there's multiple things going on at once, and it's the astrologer's skill that allows us to articulate how they can be interpreted in unison. So, for example, there's been times when I see good things coming up for Bitcoin astrology, and because I don't have the capacity to think of everything at once, I forget or I overlook, like, the US has terrible things going on. So it doesn't matter if potentially there's good news that some country or some institution adopted Bitcoin. That's not going to affect the price, like investors being scared and running for liquidity. So I think that the errors that I can notice in when I'm wrong, it's me being wrong. And I find a lot of use in that. Like, I openly am like, I keep everything up because I think it's really helpful. Like, actually for me, like, I know, like, I'm not Oracle. It's not me being in particular great. It's just me tracking this, that the cycles are really present. Like, anyone can look in and see that there's cycles and these things overlap. But when things are murky, it's often in points where there's a lot of cycles changing, and you're kind of like throwing your hands up and like, oh, I've never seen this combination before. How would I weigh that out?
You wrote books that are on your website, and I noticed you talk about addiction and trauma in those books, and you talk about your own mental health in some of your content. I am curious if that's something you want to talk about. Some of the stuff that we are covering in this podcast is kind of how humans are coping with the stresses of what's going on in the world by coming to cryptocurrency, by being kind of disenfranchised from these different issues. And they're looking to this as something not necessarily to like save them, but a place where they can freely try to do better and maybe build something that's less corrupt or more optimal for what they want it to be outside of these other systems that have kind of failed for one reason or another. So I'm curious, like, what your experience is being somebody that comes from a background that mental health is something that you do think about pretty regularly, and you have to work online, and you're in New York City, which I believe from my research is a new place for you for the past few years. And you came there during a pandemic. So it's so interesting to me how that all ties together into this picture of like how everyone around you is looking to you for influence, or they get something from you, from your content, that kind of grounds people and gives them a sense of that control that Afra was referring to. That's something I would just be interested to know what your response would be to that. It's not necessarily a question. It's more like, that's a really interesting story to me, so I want to explore it.
Yeah, in coming to New York, it was like 2017. I was coming for NYU. I mean, I've written about mental health issues, a lot of them which I don't have, but I've seen around me. So I think it's interesting to like become a character that has issues that I can do research on, and that led me to at NYU like study, not major in it, but I did study abnormal psychology because I found it interesting for people that have abnormalities enough to cause problems in the world, basically, and how that develops. I was someone who pretty easily could stay in New York I came when it was like very open. Obviously, it was like 2017. Everything was fine. Stayed completely fine during lockdowns and everything, and very good in a crisis. I think, honestly, like the least of my worries are market go down, what's going on with restrictions around me. That's not really something that tends to phase me. I just see it as like, okay, reality shifting this way. How do I respond? So I think growing up in a background of being very well suited to deal with unpredictability and crisis around me, people are like, the market's down, are you okay? I'm like, yes. Like, why would I not be okay? Like, it's just a number. When people ask me about my books, are they about me? I'm like, not really in particular. Like, some things I align with, and some things are me putting on a hat and writing from, like, I'm just very neutral. I think that I was well suited to live in New York during a time when people are like, it's so hard. I'm like, okay, I don't know. People I know have been through much worse. So I think my background leads me to be well suited in a time when other people might be looking for people who are grounded during the time.
Is your family from Texas? I'm asking because my family is.
Yeah, born and raised in Houston. My mom's side was like very poor from Alvin, Texas. And my dad came to Houston when he was 2 because he was born in Bergen-Belsen, which was a concentration camp during the Holocaust. So him, my grandmother, and my grandfather, who died like when my dad was 15 in the 60s, they came to Houston. So technically, like, I'm pretty much like Polish, but grew up in Texas. Yeah.
He was born in a concentration camp.
When the Soviets liberated the camps, they lived freely on that property for 2 years. So it wasn't until the United States people got them and allowed people to actually come with them back to the US that my grandmother and dad left Germany, Poland area and went to Texas.
Texas seems like a very fitting place for people that want to be free and, have independent, charismatic ways of being.
I didn't have a word for it, but my dad was totally like, I don't want to say anarchist, but like very much just, I mean, he grew up trying not to be a wartime survivor. He grew up wanting to be like his name is Mickey. He's like the same name as Mickey Mouse, wanting to be as like American and gung-ho as possible. So I didn't really grow up realizing it, but I lived in Houston. It's not rural. It's not like guns or anything, but I can see that there's a reason why he wanted like his house and like his yard and things that were important, because that was just generationally like a big priority.
Thank you for sharing that.
We all see this interesting triangle of this Maslow, motivation model, right? We have basic needs such as, safety needs. We need food, we need esteem, and then this hierarchy where we're going up and to self-actualization. And then later on, the top one is actually transcendence. It's about connecting with the cosmos. So like, do you find your astrology reading somehow help you achieve this goal?
The more experiences, the more knowledge, the more information that someone takes in, the more well-suited they are to thrive in an environment, simply due to if you're more aware of your circumstances, the more that you can actually survive and be suited towards them. So I think with astrology being in many ways a study of the nature of reality and what kind of architecture underlies world events and the way that they follow, being aware of that can lead to more acceptance and preparation. I have never been someone who is like, don't tell me, I don't want to know. Actually, like the second I get a text that's like, hey girl, I'm like, what the fuck do you want? Like, I'm known for just being like, don't just tell me. So I think that the preparation is something that can lead to more acceptance, because we can see that cycles come and go. This too shall pass for good events, bad events, and being more and more aware of it, like through exposure therapy, definitely helps. I don't like the word cope because then it kind of has a victim connotation, but it allows you to thrive more in the human experience, I'd say.
I want to go back to the crypto industry. So can you tell me about, how do you feel about the whole crypto industry in general, since you're, fairly new? I'm in this industry for like 2 months. I'm still, undergoing a culture shock. So like, tell me about your feeling about crypto culture, and maybe like what you're doing is a way of making the crypto space not only for crypto culture, but, more diverse in a way.
I think the underlying intention of having everyone free and having everyone control what they own and allowing for access for technically anyone with a wallet address to be able to hold their own funds and control those is first and foremost, no questions, like a really beautiful value proposition. That the underlying foundations, especially of decentralized currencies, Bitcoin in particular, and even like the underlying reasons why DeFi is built, so that we remove middlemen like banks or like brokers who just make things very complicated and immoral in a lot of cases. First and foremost, like the underlying value proposition of the industry, I think that is what carries it forward, and that is what's important to me. I think that naturally any up and coming financial opportunity is going to invite in a lot of shady shit. I don't think that that's associated with the value proposition or takes away from it. I also think that at the same time, not only are there bad actors, there are witch hunts and patterns in the community that develop in order to be hyper paranoid about everyone. And that's also an issue. I'd say that like many things in today's world, we have so much free time that we are not only concerned with issues, we're making issues out of looking for the issues. So I think that is just a major, like, I just get frustrated with people thinking that people I know in real life are scammers or whatever. I'm like, this person does not do any, like, it's kind of ridiculous. So I think the overall industry, its value proposition, first and foremost, is something I do want to continue to build with and drive home, because I think when we get caught up in the social aspect and the witch hunt over issues, or the more that we kind of develop and it attracts in people who do cause issues, that definitely takes away some of the energy and some of the excitement and just makes us look bad. So I tend to nowadays just try to keep my head down and build, not really even know or be concerned with anything that other people are doing in the space, similar to the place that I got with being a content creator. Like, I don't scroll on TikTok. I really don't know what's going on. I'm just posting. I try to have that same approach nowadays into the space, because I'd say after about 2 years of being beyond naive, like in the beginning, it was like, do you want to invest in our project and tweet about it? I was like, how exciting. I would love to do that, without realizing that they were like, I did never dump my tokens. Like, I didn't even profit off of this. I just had no idea how the game worked, to the point where when people think I'm a scammer, I'm like, please track my wallet. Like literally, please track it. So I think that I've learned enough to try to just like stay and do my own thing, and literally not disperse my energy. But I think that the overall industry, the way that it invites in all identities, is really, really admirable in the midst of many exclusionary third-party practices otherwise.
I know that everybody that is in a position where they have a lot of people following what they say, you probably get a lot of messages from people who want you to shill something. It's a very common issue, and I feel like it's a lot more prevalent than anybody really realizes, unless they're in that position where they're the person getting the emails. So I'm curious to know, how many times a week do you get a company approaching you to try to shill some shitcoin?
Thankfully, since I have an assistant managing my inbox, like things go to my admin address at first, once I give you my personal email, she knows to filter out any meme coins, anything that looks like a poorly translated, like how much for shill. Like I didn't even do that in the beginning. It's dozens a week, like dozens a day, maybe, depending. And it doesn't really slow down depending on market conditions. It's just, it happens. Actual opportunities I look into and rarely take, because if I feel pressured at all to have to make content about it, then it's just such a red flag. Because even nowadays, I get myself in situations where I see that the service is not a scam, but it feels exploitative on my end. And I'd say half the time I end up just asking for my investment back, because I'm like, no, I don't exist to mention you. I don't feel comfortable mentioning you. You could be a good product, a good service, but my audience is not going to care, because this is like some advanced DeFi. Like, I'm not going to share it or whatever. I openly, being someone who shares my life, is like, I'm transparent. And if I really like a project, and part of the reason why they're with me is because they think that my audience will want to hear about it, I, for one, never talk about like the token price idea. I openly won't talk about that. Like, I want to actually have something that people can use, not buy into. If that works out, it works out. And I openly like being transparent. So I'm like, look, guys, I got a cool investment opportunity. But I know at the same time that I will be ongoing naive, just due to the nature of how quickly like I'm progressing and growing in the spaces. I'm always the naive one that doesn't really fully understand what's happening. But the scope of it is huge. It's frustrating because sometimes I can like authentically mention a project just in passing and people think it's paid. Like, there's huge fiasco with people thinking I was paid to sponsor IOTA. It's like, excuse me? Like, no, I'm not. And to this day, I know some of the founders like in real life, and we laugh, and they'll just be like, yo, how much do we pay you to be an IOTA plant this week? Like, I haven't checked. And it's like a running joke that even with these things that like I am not affiliated with, people think it's a scam. And then for public figures, because there's been bad actors, you're made out to be the bad actor. But also I do get an insane amount of things sent my way. It's like, Obama Floki Shiba Inu, how much for a retweet? Yeah, no, just delete, laugh and delete.
It kind of goes both ways, because, we have all these marketing agencies doing that work, and they do a great job. Actually, they're amazing at controlling people's minds on a large scale. I do a volunteer thing where I teach people how to investigate fraud in crypto, because it's so easy to find. You can find it almost by accident. I don't see a way that you can really protect yourself from the chilling effect that comes from being very public and transparent. And that's kind of an issue that we talk about as well a lot internally, because we're trying to do these pseudo-anonymous or semi-private things in crypto because it's a very legal gray area, especially in the US. So the fact that you're a public entity, you're a public person, you're very transparent about your life, about your deals, about what you're doing. But on the other end of it, you are in the US. A lot of people around you are not transparent. There's all these friction points where bullshit can like thrive. So it's really insane. I don't really know if there's a solution, but I think it's an interesting problem that we're going to be dealing with probably for years.
Yeah, I didn't intend to come into the space in the first place. So like, it wasn't like I was trying, like I just was always me online. No one was following me. But so I was just a normal girl sharing my life, then entering the space. And I guess feeling like I don't trust anyone, not because I think people are bad people, but because I will always have more to lose. And so like everything needs to have a contract. I don't work with people who are not doxxed. Like, that's just absolutely not, because I know how that'll end up basically. So there can be a lot of friction. And it's often why, in terms of like people I work with, I just have to and prefer to go the more traditional route of getting funding in a way that's like very compliant, and it's traditional funds. It's not even a crypto. Like, it feels so much safer. And it's interesting, the people who know me and know how, like, I guess a small life I live, and like I have one wallet address, and all my friends even know it. Like, I've named it, everything, and it's just, there it is, like any given time. And then the stories and the paranoia that people then project onto it, I'm like, this is just insane. Like, you've created a totally different person, and it's unfortunate, but it's why the in-person relationships I made in the space have like lasted and been great. And then the online ones where people just are paranoid and just don't have an understanding of what's going on. It can be like a lot of friction, but it doesn't end things. But there's a lot of communication issues, I would say.
In one of your interviews, you said your own birth chart says throughout your whole career, you're going to pursue a lot of wealth. and it's really similar to my birth chart. So how do you interpret this? Like, how do you feel about this information?
It didn't really make sense growing up because I was into acting, and like I just knew I wasn't, like, no one ever assumed I was going to like marry and like have my will that way. Like that was never really going to be that. So the running joke when I would bring it up is my dad's just like, "You're Jewish. Like, of course that's the way it is. Like, this is how it'll end up." And I was like, "Okay, Dad, whatever." And I feel kind of neutral about it, I guess. It means that there's less focus on other areas of my life. Like literally so many planets are in this part of my life, but it's interesting. It's a cool path to be on. Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to add or anything you want to say to the audience?
Since we're recording this when the market is pretty down and difficult, it's a good time to learn and to research that. If you don't know what to do and there's not like easy money necessarily being made, it's a good time to research and learn. Yeah.
Are there things that you would like to criticize the industry for that you think maybe you choose not to? Because I know that's actually a really common thing when I talk to people in private versus when we're in a public setting about stuff that they hate about the company they work for or the industry in general. Like 95% of it is a big bullshit factory to make money and kind of take money away from poorer people. But I really actually believe in what crypto is doing. And that's why I'm here. On the other end of it, I'm curious to know if there is anything like that every day you just want to scream it on Twitter and you just can't do it for one reason or another.
It's not really crypto specific, but the misrepresentation of public figures in a way where it feels like I can't complain about it because people will just take things out of context or proof of me living like a luxurious life and be like, shut up. And that's part of the reason why I'm actually not on Twitter right now. It's so bad. It can be fine on other platforms and like YouTube, like people see me and can literally see everything that's happening. And there's no way for me to hide anything. But like on Twitter specifically, the microcosm of hate that seems to be propagated by people that you trust and you think are great people, but who at a given moment can see the opportunity to like nuke or take down someone and know that it'll raise their reputability, ironically, by not being reputable with what they're doing. It's just a huge problem because sure, there's some idiotic public figures who literally are scammers. And you can just tell by, frankly, like their just mental competence and interviews and things. You're like, okay, this person's just, yeah, I'm not taking financial recommendations from them. But the witch hunts and the drive to want to misrepresent people who gain success and built a following, no matter what, is just, I just feel like I don't have a well-articulated or a good way to talk about it on a platform that seems to have decided that I don't have inherent value to share on Twitter specifically. So that is definitely the issue. I just think the witch hunts and the misrepresentation and the microcosm rabbit hole trying to take people down has just gone too far.
Yeah, it's like everything you say, you can't actually remove anything from the internet anymore. If we're in the EU, you actually can. But if you're here, anything anybody puts up, it's there forever.
Right. It feels stupid because recently there was like a mention of, oh, these influencers were involved in the sketchy pre-sale and it rugged. And I was like, yeah, I openly in a YouTube video was like, I got asked to be an investor. Like, how cool. Like it was just so stupid because I'm like, yeah, please go. I'm not even going to apologize. Like go back and see me be stupid. And then the next video be like, I had no idea. Like I am not going to take profit. Like you can see to this day, I literally haven't. So it's kind of funny in that way where there's no explanation, no context. It's all just, how can I annihilate this person? Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. Have a good rest of your Friday.
If you like our content, give us a follow on Twitter at W3Revolution_IO. You can also find us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, Castbox, and pretty much all the other major podcast listening platforms. See you next time.